Hey guys, Harv here, and welcome back to Career Mode. This is the series in which we play through Kerbal Space Program Career, but it is very nearly coming to an end. We have been trying for the previous 2 episodes to land on the planet Eve and take off again, just using a probe, not using a man yet, but I feel as soon as we actually get the essence of how to do it, even with just a probe, as soon as we get that down, we'll be able to move on and progress to bigger missions like with a man. But probably only one bigger mission, we shall see. Having said that, this particular episode is literally just for testing. We are testing the effectiveness of various different lander designs, and you see this one here. Now, the one that I left you with in the end of the previous Career Mode episode, which was quite a while ago admittedly, the one there looked completely different to this. There's a very good reason for that. That's because this is different. And it looks even more different now, seeing as this has spiraled completely out of control and bits are flying everywhere. Come on, Harvey, you're just doing that for fun now. Yeah, it turns out there's a problem with the fuel lines or something. I need to change some things around, so we'll be doing that in just a moment. This is the second lander design, based off of the failings of the first, which unfortunately, though I did try out and I did test, I didn't record. And I really ought to have done that, because otherwise, the continuation and whatever, it had solid rocket boosters on the first stage, okay? It wasn't going to be particularly good. It was Enter Elysium's weird man-child thing, I don't know. Anyway, it turns out the problem with this particular stage was that the fuel lines on the outer edge were too far in. So there's a tip for you. If you have a cylinder of these tanks spaced around the outside of a bigger tank, don't connect your fuel lines directly from one to the other to the nearest points, because that won't give you sufficient room for the actual fuel lines to connect properly. And you can see here, the one that we actually wanted to disconnect first, the first pair in our asparagus staging setup, is draining slower than the third pair, which as a result means that I dropped the first pair unwillingly, despite the fact that it was actually the third that had run out and not the first. So to fix this, we simply just move those struts and those fuel lines out further so that they have sufficient room for the— oh god damn, I've done it again. It's a recurring problem, that. Never mind. So that they have sufficient room to connect properly. Now, before I launch into my continued rambling of the video, there is something I would like to tell you. And that is that I am going to be doing a fundraising event this February, starting on the 18th. It's going to be a live stream in a similar vein to the charity one that we did last year in August for the Kerbal Polar Expedition. The fundraising is to subsidise the costs of an educational trip for a class of UK students to Korolev in Russia, which is home to the Russian Federal Space Agency's Mission Control. You might be asking, why have I chosen to support this particular trip? Because I'm going on it. Yes, you can have the opportunity to pack me off to Russia for about a week in December of this year, so that I can return to talk about interesting spacey things in my future videos. The format is going to be similar to that charity livestream that I did back in August, and as in there'll be a series of Kerbal Space Program live streams over the course of several consecutive days. Where previously we did 5 days, this one's only going to be for 3, the 18th, the 19th and the 20th of February, for 3 hours each day, starting from 7 PM till 10 PM GMT, which is equivalent to 8 PM till 11 PM CET, which is Central Europe, 2 PM to 5 PM EST, 11 AM to 2 PM PST. Timings are on the screen right now, I don't have to read them out for you. You can probably read. If you can't, you have my condolences. So, that is going to be really interesting. It's my chance to go to Russia, the furthest away I've probably ever been from home. I'm not sure, because I have been to America once, so maybe not. However, I really would appreciate it if you supported it. It's not a charity event, it is a more personal benefit to me, but it is an educational and a cultural trip. So it's certainly not that it's lining my pockets. This is subsidising the ridiculously high costs to actually stay in Korolev, which is a very interesting place. But yes, it's subsidising the costs of that for both my year and the year below and the year below that, the people who are interested in physics in my school. So hopefully you'll be able to support that. More details are coming soon. It will be live streamed on twitch.tv/HOCgaming. A video will be uploaded to this channel soon, specifically about it, and I'd recommend you keep an eye out on the channel for any more news, because it is currently being organised. Everything's not finalised, but we're pretty sure it's going to be on those days, and I hope you can join us. Anyway, back to the video. You can see that various launch stages we've tried have had several different problems. Now, before resolving them necessarily, I thought I'd test out this launch stage on the big colossal launch stage, the colossal stage, as I think I called it in the live stream that I recorded this in. Unfortunately, this has got a problem, which you've probably been staring at for the past few minutes. One of these engines has ran out prematurely, and the reason for this is as of yet unknown. However, because this is such a colossal launch stage made up of so many colossal engines, we actually have sufficient vectoring, sufficient gimbaling, you know, where you orient your nozzle slightly in order to gain some rotational force, so you can point yourself whatever way you like. We do have some control over where it goes, despite the fact that the thrust is now not even as a result of that burnt out engine, and despite the fact that various explosions have happened. But no matter, they don't seem to be... hang on. Yeah. Nuclear engines of various shapes and sizes drop off, and the entire ship eventually cleaves itself in two, blasting off into the sky as everything just disintegrates. Now, you may have wondered, what's the problem with this? Why did that happen? Interestingly enough, I don't actually know, at this point in time, I didn't actually know why the fuel ran out early, but the reason that everything disintegrated should be fairly obvious. Struts. We need more struts. That's just the universal law of KSP. Anyway, I take this opportunity, this unscheduled but somewhat welcome opportunity, to test out the lander and to see how well it would work on Eve. Of course, Kerbin's only slightly comparable to Eve, but on Kerbin it works fairly well. On Eve, technically, it should work even better. Well, that was the water's fault, that was not the lander's fault. Just, we can skim over that. Technically on Eve, because it has a higher pressure atmosphere, despite the fact it has a higher gravity, the parachute should be more effective. So we should be okay with this lander setup parachutes thing on Eve. We may have to do some retro burning at the last minute, but we shall see. Anyway, over the sound of the engines, we start rising up, and you can see, looking from the spec here, the structural failage on linkage between a fuel tank and another fuel tank. Looking around, we can see that this particular fuel tank here, the one most facing us, is not connected to the rest, so it seems slightly lower for a reason, and that reason's that it's not connected to the rest. So that is why our engine runs out quicker. Now, I've desperately attempted to try and manage this by taking the tank, the stack, on the opposite side to the one that will run out sooner, and to transfer the fuel, hoping that they'll both run out similar times and that will stabilize the craft somewhat. Unfortunately, I didn't really check whether the stack I chose was exactly opposite to the previous, and as a result, this happens. I said that a bit too early, didn't I? As a result, this happens. The engine flames out, and it wasn't exactly opposite, meaning that the force lacking on one side in comparison to the greater force on the other side of the cluster of engines is simply too great, and it starts flying all over the place. The thing is, that stage was nearly empty anyway, so I can just try and continue using what I already had, and we do manage to do so to some degree. Burning away now, trying to orient ourselves back along that 90-degree axis, and yet, on this stage as well, you can see, if you look at our fuel lines to the bottom left, look at the fuel measures, the gauges, you can see that one of the engines is, again, running out prematurely. Which means that another one of these tanks has disconnected prematurely. Now, I tried to do the same trick again, hoping it would go better next second time. Unfortunately, because there aren't sufficient engines to overcome the force, this flamed out even before my fix was going to even come into effect. So we end up spinning, and now eventually the opposite one has actually run out of fuel, so we might be able to get this back on track. The thrust now is even because I have, to a degree, I have adjusted it. And it seems to be better-ish, kind of, maybe? Anyway, we use that stage, we carry on, burning with our nuclear engines, and we get higher, 90 kilometers high. Now the test here was to see whether I could get this thing into orbit. And considering how many problems there have been so far, and taking into account the fact that this is a higher orbit than we necessarily need, we only need it to be out of the atmosphere, which is 70 kilometers thereabouts, it still managed to get this launcher, or this lander, into orbit. So this means that the launch stage, the Colossal Titan launch stage, actually works fairly well. And despite all the problems, we were able to overcome them almost essentially on the fly. So, this should work. Now, of course, the actual question is, will the lander work? Because yes, that's what we're testing today. We want to know about the lander, not necessarily the launch stage. So, we take it out to Eve. I won't lie, I won't try and hide over the truth. I did not legitimately push this out to Eve, although I do have ideas on how we're going to do that in the next episode. No, I turned on infinite fuel and I boosted this thing out, and I think later on I actually edited the config files or used HyperEdit or something. One of those crazy mods that I don't install, to move this thing out to Eve. Because to test it, I don't need to know that I can get it there, I just need to know that it will function once it's there. You can call this a simulation, predictably. Unfortunately, for those of you who know exactly what Eve is all about, this simulation hasn't particularly gone to plan because we're right smack bang over the ocean. Which means that we would not land before we touch down in the water, which has two problems. One, our altitude at that point would be far too low, the atmospheric pressure would be far too high, we'd be wasting so much unnecessary fuel. And secondly, we'd be in water, which in the Kerbal space program is death, basically. So we burn prematurely and we waste a few meters per second, but overall I think it probably saved us from having to go from sea level upwards. And going up, things aren't working particularly well. You can tell that our fuel is simply running out too fast. And though I've sped this up so that things run out even quicker, we do have problems. For instance, this shroud has jammed itself in the couplings. Yeah, I really don't like the atomic engine for one reason. That one reason is that its shroud separates sideways rather than beneath it, which means that you can't have anything on all degrees around the tank or around the engine, because otherwise the shroud will just destroy those engines. Luckily it didn't actually destroy the engines here, but not that that really matters because these engines are continuing on anyway. Eventually those engines run out and we carry on upwards with our prograde ridiculously over to the side and our altitude, our apoapsis, ridiculously low. So it's very clear that this launcher design is nowhere near sufficient, and we have a few problems. Main problem with this one was that our fuel didn't work quite correctly, the center tank didn't run out as soon as I expected it to, so we ended up trying to do some on-the-fly stage editing, and it wasn't particularly efficient. And of course the nuclear engine's shroud jettisoned and destroyed and caused it to spin and destroyed all those tanks on the side. So, a new type of class, a new type of launcher, one with 8 tanks on the outside, which we've just dropped, 9 tanks on the inside, which we are currently testing, followed by asparagus staging of more tanks on this higher up stage, which is now about to come into play. Unfortunately, the nuclear engine does its thing and 2 of those engines destroyed themselves, though oddly enough, as seems to be the theme with this episode, we actually managed to carry on functioning. And this is why this episode exists. It's not because we achieved anything, I don't think we really did, especially not compared to what I've done in previous episodes, but the fact that so many things have gone wrong in launchers, and yet we carried on functioning with the sheer might and the epicosity, perhaps if that was a word, of vectoring engines. Vectoring engines, that's what this episode can be called. The sheer incredibility of vectoring engines. Anyway, we're carrying upwards, we carry on detaching our outstage, we get this up one, and what we've done to this particular craft is jettisoned, I wouldn't say jettisoned, we've just removed 2 of the pairs that would be taken out by the shroud if that was going to happen. So, we get up higher, we jettison that craft, and now, of course, it does actually work, because the shroud separates and it's got no engine there to destroy it. And you can see the camera, I seem pretty happy with this. So, getting up higher, this thing ought to be able to get into orbit by all accounts, considering it's supposed to be able to get into orbit around Eve. If it couldn't even do it around Kerbal, that might have been slightly an issue, perhaps. So, looking at this now, we can tell this works, but will it work on Eve? Luckily this time we're over land, although it's not much of an improvement considering just how over the, just how low we're going to be landing. We're landing in a valley, not on top of a mountain. And you may think that doesn't make too much of a difference. It really does. Really, really does. So again, this one was cheated, I suppose. This one went out to Eve illegitimately in a simulation, not pushed there by a legitimate craft. And we come down, we get ready to land on the surface. However, once again, for the second time, I view it too dangerous to actually land. We're on a slope. Okay, it may be that, we haven't got any engines and we've just destroyed our entire craft. That may be one reason why it's too dangerous to land. And that was actually due to a bug in KSP. By all accounts, we really should have survived that, but no, alas, we did not. So, carrying on, having quick loaded, we're going to bring ourselves back down, hopefully land this time on a bit of a better... no, it's not going to happen, is it? No, we're going to end up landing on the slope. Damn and blast. Well, what I really should do now is perform a soft landing. And burn, in order to slow down so that the parachutes can open without destroying my entire craft, which is really, really odd, and it shouldn't have happened anyway. So I'm going to try that. Unfortunately, I can't quite remember, but we will find out in a second. Did I do this legitimately? Yes! Yes, we are burning fuel, so I actually legitimately burnt fuel then. That would be necessary in a proper mission, perhaps, in order to actually get this to happen. Unfortunately, coming down now, we're about to land on a slope, and I don't want this to crash, so I'm going to burn again. Fly upwards, detach our landing legs, which I have the capability to do, drop those outer 8 engines, and carry on burning upwards. This one already seems to be a lot more promising than the previous launcher. We have made some progress. The question now is, have we made enough? These 9 engines are about to run out, and there they go, jettisoned now. The nuclear engine works. It goes to work in synergizement with its other 2 pairs, one of which has just detached, and the speed is still increasing, but we have very little fuel left. We're only 12 kilometers up, and the atmosphere of Eve is very, very thick. And finally, this pair runs out, and that's about it. We simply have not enough thrust and too much weight for that thrust to try and carry. And that is it. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Career Mode. We've learned a great deal. Most importantly, vectoring engines are awesome, and secondly, we are struggling with this Eve challenge. Hopefully the next episode won't go quite so badly. Thanks for watching, and once again I'd like to remind you about the fundraising event which will be happening over the half term. That is February the 18th till the 20th for 3 hours each day from the times that are on your screen right now till the times that are on your screen right now. 7 PM till 10 PM GMT, 8 PM till 11 PM Central European Time, 2 PM till 5 PM EST, 11 AM till 2 PM PST. Subsidising the costs of an educational and cultural trip for myself and my fellow classmates. Of course, this isn't a charity drive, so I'm not going to urge you to donate quite with the passion that I did last time. We will in fact be doing another charity drive this year over the summer, but I'm going to leave a little gap in between these two because I do want to support both. So there'll be more information coming about that. Do remember to keep an eye out on the channel. Information will be coming your way. If you want to stay up to date in as close to real time as possible, then follow me on Twitter is probably the best way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.